When you think of sandbox games, you're probably thinking of Minecraft, Garry's Mod, Grand Theft Auto, Saints Row, but the one that stuck in my mind has always been Crackdown. If you haven't heard of this game, I'm not even surprised. I would consider it one of Microsoft's biggest failures, and if you have heard of this game, it's probably because it came with the demo for Halo 3. But why did this game crash and burn? I'm not going to tell you that it was a technical masterpiece in terms of gameplay, but it was fun. Big, explosive, stupid fun. But I'm going to talk about the first two games and show you guys why it holds a special place in my heart, and then go into its history of crushing failure. So Crackdown 1, actually hold up, just a little heads up, there is definitely going to be spoilers, not that that matters too much, I mean the game isn't heavily story based, but spoilers ahead. But Crackdown 1 is about being a super powered agent working for the agency as you're trying to clean up Pacific City's crime. The main goal of the game is to take out the three crime organizations known as Los Muertos, the Volk, and Shy Gen. You do this with explosions, supercars, and good old fashioned fisticuffs. Okay, but being technical, you're taking out gang kingpins to slowly weaken the gang and eventually wipe it off the map. All the while, you're going to be gaining skill points for taking people out along the way. Run somebody over? That'll be driving skill points. Snipe someone from a top roof? You get agility and gun points. Punch someone until they're unalived? You'll get stronger. And when I talk about skill points, I'm not talking about the kind you invest. This isn't an RPG. Your character just gets better at it. At the beginning of the game, you can't pick up cars, but a few strength levels later and suddenly you're doing it like you're the Hulk. Speaking of cars, the more you level up your driving skill, the more the agency vehicles transform. The semi gets a turbo booster that helps you ram cars off the road, the supercar lets you scoop cars off the road and has two mounted machine gun turrets, and the SUV can not only jump, but climb walls. When people say that Xbox 360 and PS3 had the golden age of sandbox games, this is what they mean, because this was bonkers. Not only was the game fun to play, the map was very interesting to look at. In the middle, you have the agency island, which not much to do there, but you can climb the tower and, look over the entire city. On the western portion of the map, you have Los Muertos taking up two of the islands, with the southwest feeling more urban and Chicago-like, and the northwest feeling more mountainous and countryside. Moving over to southeast, you have the Volk's territory, which feels very industrial when you drive through it. It's meant to show the Russian mafia-inspired gang is much more business-like, and even though I wouldn't say Los Muertos' area is perfectly put together, the Volk's very much doesn't feel like somewhere you would want to live. When you look at the Los Muertos territory, you can see a well-established apartment community, an amusement park, a couple clubs, but when you drive through the Volk territory, you can tell this used to be Pacific City's industrial park before the gangs took over. There are very clearly places to live, but it just doesn't feel that homely. Last in the northeast is the Shy Gen territory, and it's a cityscape that's meant to look more futuristic than the other two islands. It looks livable, vibrant, and even though the map isn't that big, it feels big. It also helps that the game gives you a couple side objectives like hunting for skill orbs or doing time trials on both foot or car. But for a game that came out in 2007, I would say the city was extremely well designed. By the way, this game also included online multiplayer, and it had a mode called Keys to the City where you could play with cheats, which turned this sandbox game into a true sandbox. Now earlier I mentioned that this game came with a beta for Halo 3, and I'm really glad Microsoft did that. I'm absolutely sure it was the core reason why a lot of people picked the game up, but with Halo not coming out until September and this one coming out in February, it still gave the game a chance to shine. And maybe the game would have naturally gotten a mass appeal, but it was still a new IP and they gave it a good shot. But now let's move on to talking about the sequel. Crackdown 2 is once again a batch of stupid fun. Although a lot of people complain that there's a lot of things missing from the first game, I think overall they improved the gameplay. Before I talk about that though, I want to go over a quick plot synopsis about what's changed in the world. So at the end of the first game, we find out that the agency was behind supplying all of the criminal gangs. This was so that the city would become desperate so they could swoop in and become the hero. But while you were taking out gang kingpins, you took out a man named Dr. Baltazar Chernenko. And this wonderful ding-dong was making genetically modified humans. They could even be seen in the first game lifting cars. Unfortunately, this turned into a virus, and now there's a zombie horde-like amount of freaks overrunning the city. Once again, there isn't a ton of plot around this game. It's focused on taking out this rebellion group called Cell and creating a beacon that's meant to wipe out most of the freaks in the city. The agency is blaming a woman named Catalina Thorne, but if you take the time and find all of the audio logs, you can find out that she's really just a scapegoat. And her and Cell are trying to stop the beacon being made not because they want the freak virus to exist, but because the agency shouldn't have a weapon that powerful. The beacon at any time of the agency's discretion can wipe out any group of people. And not that anyone should probably have that kind of power, but especially not the people with genetically modified superhumans. So Crackdown 2 brings you back to Pacific City, but it is kinda wrecked. There are parts of the city that are walled off, even though they're extremely accessible for somebody with our physical performance, but it's clear the place has gone through a hard time. Your main objective though is to claim cell strongholds, close freak breaches, and light beacons inside of freak bases. How will you accomplish this, you might ask? You will once again use explosions, supercars, and good old-fashioned fisticuffs. Okay, but in terms of gameplay, a few things are different, and we're gonna start off by going over what we lost. First off, agency vehicles no longer transform when you get into them, and we have lost access to the semi. Now this isn't really all that big of a deal. I mean, don't get me wrong, it kinda sucks that we lost the semi, but to be fair, when it rammed into stuff and caused explosions, it was just hurting itself. I will say I did really miss the cars transforming though. I mean, it made it feel really rewarding to level up your driving skill, but it wasn't a deal breaker for me. The next thing we lost was the Kingpin system, and I feel like this would have been really easy to implement with the cell resistance. And to be honest, I didn't think I'd miss it that much, but all you do when you take a cell stronghold is take out a certain amount of enemies and then you just claim it. Which isn't a bad idea, but then you have to do pretty much the exact same thing to close freak breaches, and it gets a bit repetitive. A major reason I would say the lack of story worked well in the first game is because at least the villains had faces. In fact, they had entire dossiers for these people and would tell us exactly what they did for the gang, so we'd know what kind of impact we could expect by taking them out. In Cell's case, I'm pretty sure the only named person we know about is Catalina Thorne, and even then, I'm pretty sure we don't even see her until the final cutscene. You're mostly just taking out faceless goons, and it doesn't make you feel like you're making a huge impact beyond, oh, well, now I have another landing zone. Whereas in the previous game, if you took out the gang's local arms dealer, they would suddenly have weaker guns. Things you would notice beyond, well, oh, now there's just less enemies to shoot at. Now, the last thing the game was missing was its vibrancy. I understand with the freak virus, everything's gotta look a bit torn down, but if it weren't for landmarks on the islands, I probably wouldn't be able to tell which one I was on. The sky is almost always a grayish dark if it's not nighttime and even darker, and it does not complement the comic booky-like art style of the series. I guess a better way to say it is it makes the color palette kinda dull, and it gets a little boring to look at after a while. But now let's move away from the negative and talk about what the game did really well and added on to. So to start off, even though the core concepts and controls of the games are pretty similar, they have greatly improved mobility and combat. You can jump higher, run faster, and you are no longer restricted to a single awkward kick. In fact, you can now pick up things like rebar or street lamps and swing them at enemies. On top of all of this, if you max out your agility, you now have access to a glide ability. It can be a little hard to get used to at first, but once you do, it is a fantastic way to traverse the city. Speaking of which, like I said earlier, we did lose access to the semi, but we gained a new vehicle. They gave us the Agency Tank. It's heavily armored and it will basically take out anything. Also, you can steal Agency choppers, which makes climbing things super easy when you don't feel like climbing. I actually ended up using them hunting down the last of the agility orbs I was looking for in my playthrough. Moving on though, the last thing this game added were underground freak layers. There wasn't a ton to do in these, but basically a beacon would drop in the middle of them and you would just have to protect it until a certain amount of time. Once it would go off, it would just wipe out all the freaks in the hole. I usually hate protection missions, but it's extremely manageable, especially if you have explosives, and it is very, very satisfying watching all of the freaks get disintegrated at the end. Some people say that this game should have just been DLC, and I understand the argument, but I feel like they changed the gameplay enough to justify a second game. I said before that the core concepts of the games were very similar, but when you play the second game, I feel like you can feel more weight in your movement. You also don't get ragdolled as easily, but the graphics are also much better. 3 years made a difference, and the abilities we gained in it definitely makes it hard to go back to the first one. Anyway, let's move on to how this series crashed and burned, and what they could do about it. Crackdown 3 was a major mistake that should not have happened. This is a game that would have been amazing in the modern world and so much they could have done with the online, and instead they botched it. I only ever got to play the demo at the mall, and had I enjoyed it, that would have been a console buy for me. But after 10 minutes, it just did not feel the same. Let's start off with cloud-based destruction. This was a destruction engine that only worked online, and the servers actually shut down. So that feature was just gone. On top of that, it took them 9 years to make this sequel, and despite having Terry Crews as their spokesperson, they just could not generate hype for this game. Like, everything that could go wrong with this game just kinda did, and it seems like Microsoft wanted it to succeed, and it just could not. And I know it wasn't a massive franchise anyway, but it still could have done better than this. So what can they do from here? Personally, I think the first 2 games are solid, and I think they should be given the Oblivion treatment. And seeing as the first Halo is now coming out on PlayStation, I feel like they could release it on all consoles. But with how bad the last game bombed, I can't see them making a sequel, and that wouldn't even be a sound decision. But reintroducing people into how good this game can be would probably do wonders. I'll admit that maybe I'm a little nostalgia blind, but this is an IP I really don't want to see go away. Anyway, I'm going to start wrapping this video up, and I would love to hear your guys' comments on this below. I wouldn't be surprised if nobody in my comment section has ever played this game, but if you haven't, I would encourage you to go out and try it on your own. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe to the channel, it does help me out a ton, and feel free to tell me about an IP you know about that just kinda died off. As usual though, try not to do anything too stupid, please keep yourself safe, and until next time, this is Thundross signing off.